Hello and welcome to FP Live. I'm Ravi Agrawal, Foreign Policy's Editor-in-Chief. We're in the middle of a new great game, and the prize this time is AI supremacy. The United States and China are engaged in a race for the best tech, as well as a scramble to control the supply chains that will get them there. In a moment, I will bring on two guests with a terrific vantage point at the intersection of tech, policy, and business. If this is your first time joining us on FP Live, welcome. We'll take some subscriber questions as always. And if you would like to join in, use the code FP Live for a pretty good discount. We are also podcasts. Just look for FP Live on your favorite audio platform. So, we all know that China is working very hard to close the gap with the United States on AI development. What does that actually entail in terms of everything from critical minerals and export controls to trade and geopolitics? And how do new advances like generative AI change the dynamic? Now, as it happens, in just the last few days, leaders from Beijing and Washington met in London to discuss a new trade deal. We don't yet have all of the details on what they agreed on, but we do know that the last attempt at a deal fell apart because China continued to restrict shipments of valuable rare earth minerals, which are the crucial components in the tech supply chain. Well, my guests today are well placed to give us a 30,000-foot view on AI competition between China and the United States, and certainly they have all the air miles to show for it. Jared Cohen and George Lee are both co-heads of the Goldman Sachs Global Institute. This is the second episode in our series with them. So, Jared, welcome back, and George, great to have you join in on the fun. George, I'm going to come to you first, and if I could just start with a big picture question. I said at the start that China's catching up in the AI race at a high level. How close are they?
Well, first of all, Ravi, thank you for having us. Great to be with you now. Always great to be with my partner, Jared Cohen. So look, I think let's step back for a second. The U.S. China technology race obviously predates the generative AI revolution. You can go back, we can go back, let's go back to the Trump 1.0, where they imposed restrictions against Huawei and ZTE. What's been fascinating is the generative AI revolution has provoked a bit of a pivot inside China, and the surge of confidence, investment, and focus in this area is really fascinating. If you go back to 2021, Xi imposed a series of crackdowns on the then kind of leading technology ecosystem in China. That faded into the fog of the zero COVID era, though he did impose some messaging there about trying to emphasize hard tech versus social media or education tech or other things. We emerged from COVID with the rise of generative AI, and early on, China evinced some ambivalence about this, and one can understand it. In a more closed, semi-authoritarian regime, the idea of an emergent machine that is less controllable is somewhat threatening, and China imposed some of the most rigorous regulations around this space.
Now, and George, I just want to make sure we bring everyone along with us here. Very quick definition. What is generative AI?
Great. Generative AI, which really has emerged, most publicly in the last 3 years with the emergence of ChatGPT and other models. It is the ability of machines to reckon with, understand, and communicate in English language, to be interlocutors with us, again, to comprehend and communicate in English language. And they're very different machines than we're used to. They're probabilistic, not deterministic. And they have a fascinating range of emergent capabilities, moving very fast. I'm sure we'll talk about it. But again, China and Xi express some ambivalence about this. The thing that seems to have changed, and it's unclear whether the pivot predates the DeepSeek moment or is prologue or is past to the DeepSeek moment, really the emergence of a highly capable model from China that expressed its own native capabilities and captured the attention of the global ecosystem around China's ability to compete and lead in this space. That provoked, I think, a new policy response in China, which is to say, let's stop our ambivalence about this technology. Let's lean into it. Let's integrate it with all our historical strengths in data, robotics, payments, et cetera. And so now we're in kind of the sprint mode of a real race for supremacy in this technology between the U.S. and China. And it's really emerged as a critical vector of competition between governments. I suppose the question is, will there be a winner? And, Jared, you've talked about that.
So I think part of the challenge we have when we think about the competition between the U.S. and China is we've never had a situation where America's third largest trading partner is its most formidable adversary, and so we don't have a historic frame of reference for that. People incorrectly apply a Cold War lens to it, including in the AI context, which we're here talking about today. And the problem with a Cold War framework is it applies zero-sum thinking to something where there really can't be an outright winner. When the U.S. and China's economies are intertwined in a way that the Soviet Union and the United States never were, that makes an outright winner not something that is going to happen. When you look at the complexity of supply chains, not just around high-end chips, but the tens of thousands of component parts that exist within a data center, it's all intertwined. And just when you look at the evolution of technological competition, we have a frame of reference for this within Silicon Valley, where companies seem like they're winning, and that just inspires others to pop up. There's always new entries into the market. This is just happening at a sovereign level, and it's involving a lot of different companies, a lot of different countries, different theses. And so my view is I think it's the wrong question to ask, will there be a winner in the AI race between the US and China? Even sort of thinking in terms of will China catch up? It's all milestone driven and it's all cumulative. The reality is, in a world where the two countries are competitively coexisting, at any given time, one country can have the upper hand over the other, but both countries will end up winning. It's a question of who at any given moment will experience outsized wins, which are temporary at best.
And Jared, we've sort of mentioned DeepSeek, but not in any great detail yet. My understanding is it didn't shock computer scientists or insiders in the AI world, but it did shock the US national security community. Why is that?
So I think there's a couple reasons. One, there was this perception that robust export controls on China, particularly around GPUs, were limiting their compute power and therefore making it impossible for them to run large language models at the same scale, and it was giving them an uphill battle when it came to generative AI. But as we all know, the story of innovation is that necessity drives innovation, not just smart computer scientists. China has both. And I think part of what spooked everybody with DeepSeek is it managed, and George will correct me if I have these numbers wrong, it managed to basically perform at the same level as GPT-4 at roughly 5% of the cost, give or take. And so whether or not it was operating at scale or not, it was a research milestone that introduced the idea that preventing China through export controls was an insufficient strategy to hold them back. Combine that with just the ambiguity around what DeepSeek was and what it wasn't, and it introduced all these other questions around the Huawei chip and so forth, and it's that opaqueness that created more questions. And then also, most people still don't understand this. So the market's reaction was outsized to the reality of what was going on when you talk to computer scientists. But I would argue there's kind of two hyperventilation moments in the United States that have happened in the context of the competition between the US and China. The first was the hyperventilation moment over 5G, where the US realized that China didn't just have a first mover advantage. China basically had total advantage when it came to sub-6 spectrum. And the US had an alternative that worked in stadiums, but not really anywhere else. The second hyperventilation, I think, was around DeepSeek, and that was more of a market hyperventilation that reinforced the strategic and policy hyperventilation. Now, what it did, and George mentioned this a little bit, is I think the tech private sector in China had gone a little bit adrift, or been pushed a little adrift from the state-led system. And now what you're seeing as a result of the market reaction to DeepSeek is a realignment of the private tech sector in China with the state-led system. And I think that, at the end of the day, is the bigger consequence, more than a technological breakthrough or a research breakthrough.
And George, I was going to bring that up because it strikes me that the Chinese model might actually have an advantage here in its ability to corral public and private sectors together, to move in sort of one step, as it were, whereas the American or even a Western system could have, a lot more leakages there in communications even.
Yeah, I think there are two sides of that coin, Ravi, which is on the one hand, the U.S. and Western economies have thrived through the openness, capitalist approach to innovation and problem solving. And when it comes particularly to algorithmic advancements, I think that's served us well. The thing that you might eye, state-oriented actors like China jealously is their ability to impose kind of long-term plans for some of the predicates behind these models. Those include the ability to take a long-term view on building power resources, modernizing transition, sourcing some of the very, you mentioned critical minerals earlier, but some of the resources that lie at the root of this. And so I think one of the things that was super interesting about DeepSeek is that it illuminated the fact that China can lead and innovate at the algorithmic model level. Jared mentioned the cost advantages. In some ways, I think those were a bit overplayed in the public consciousness. But beneath the waves, the technical work inside the R1 model, the papers they've published reveal some of the most interesting computer science work in making these models smarter, reason better, et cetera. So it's clear China's now at or close to the frontier on the algorithmic front, and they have all the advantages you referenced of being able to have a little bit more command control and consistency in marshaling resources like power, which is going to be really important here.